Hi, everyone. I am Juliet, and I am very lucky to be here today because I have been a fan of Esi Edugyan since I just told her, but 2011 when I discovered Half Blood Blues. And so when Books Are Magic wrote to me and asked if I would come and do this, I was like, what? No. You're kidding, really? I'm actually a huge fan of hers, so I'm a little bit starstruck, and I hope you'll bear with me. But thank you for letting me come out tonight and talk to you. It's a total honor. And I'm just really happy to be here on this Monday night with you. And welcome to the
Likewise.
States.
Oh, thank you.
Again, I understand you come a lot, but I hope Brooklyn treats you well this time. So we just had a really good introduction to why Esi Edugyan is one of the most important writers working right now. We heard about all the prizes that she's been nominated and has won. And I just wanted to say that the thing that really struck me about her writing when I first read Half Blood Blues, and which is totally borne out with Washington Black, is how relentlessly unexpected it is. And I think that, your craft and your elegant, beautiful prose is just, so transportive and wonderful to read, but the fact is that every turn of plot is completely unexpected. I have the creativity that goes into your books. It's just astounding to me. The place, the time, the characters. So I'm really excited to share this with everyone tonight. And I thought that a little background research for this event, I went ahead and I tried to find what other people had thought about it, and I found that the New York Times also liked it. So, yeah. What a coincidence. So Colm Toibin had written this for the New York Times, and for me, it really put a finger on what was so special about this book. He wrote, Edugyan is determined that the fate of Washington Black will not be dictated by history, that the novel will instead give him permission to soar above his circumstance and live a life that has been shaped by his imagination, his intelligence, and his rich sensibility. And the quote is about Washington Black, but I think it's also very much about the creation of Washington Black there. That all informs the prose. He's not a pawn in history so much as a great noticer in time, with astonishing skill at capturing the atmosphere in a room. He is also a lost soul who moves through the novel as though in search of some distant, sorrowful notion of home. So even amongst all this inventiveness and adventure and this great storyscape that you've created, there is this deeply heartfelt search for truth and identity and home. And there's so much soul in this book. I'm excited to talk about with you. But I also read online during my research that this was inspired by a true story. And I would like to hear your background on what was that little kernel and what your launching off point was.
Sure. So, can everybody hear me? Is that okay? When you were speaking about the unexpected turns in the plot, I mean, they're very much unexpected for me as well. Where I started from was not where I ended up. I'd initially thought I was writing a novel about the Tichborne claimant series of trials, which, for those of you who aren't familiar with those, they took place from the 1860s to the 1890s in England, and they centered around the fate of a young man, a 25-year-old aristocrat called Roger Tichborne, who was missing it. He went missing at sea when he was on a pleasure tour, and his boat was found shipwrecked off the coast of Argentina, and everyone was presumed dead. But his mother refused to believe that he had died because he was her favorite. So she put notices in papers all around the world and got a response 4 years later from Australia, from a small town called Wagga Wagga. There was a butcher there saying that, no, I've been living under an assumed name, but I'm really Roger, and I'm ready to come home and, take up my place at the head of the estates. And she was delighted, and she immediately sent him the £400 that he requested to settle up some debts. But she understood that probably the rest of the family was going to need more proof than just this man's word. And just by chance, one of the family servants who'd worked in their employ for about 40 years had just retired to Sydney, Australia. So it was very convenient for him to go out and make the identification. And this man was called Andrew Bogle, and he was an ex-slave who'd been stolen off a plantation in Jamaica, actually. by a member of the Tichborne household who had been, I think, doing some work at this plantation, and then when he was leaving, decided to steal this young man, I guess, along with the silverware. I don't know. It was just like this. He'd seen this man and taken a liking to him and decided that he was going to carry him away to England. And so Andrew Bogle worked in his employment for 40 years. He started as a valet and became a butler and retired and was living in Australia, and then actually did make the identification and said it was Roger, and then they traveled back to England together. But what struck me about that story was, I thought I was going to tell this narrative of the Tichborne trials through Bogle's eyes and just have it that way. But as I was doing this, I realized I was much less interested in all of the crazy machinations of the trials, which went on endlessly. There were suits and countersuits, and it was just such a tangled story. And I thought, well, where do you actually begin with this? And I realized I was much more interested in just the character and the psychology of somebody who had been born into very brutal circumstances and would have had a very prescribed and limited idea of what his life could be, for him to be suddenly wrenched out of that and then taken to live in England and then to travel around. I thought that was my story.
So for anyone in the room who hasn't read the book, the Tichborne trials never even come into it. So this is the beautiful kernel of the idea that became a work of art completely unrelated, but I love that.
Yeah, you can see that there's, little residual things like the name Titch.
Yeah. That's great. I love that.
Much, yeah.
I just want to assure everyone in the room that she has spoiled absolutely nothing about the plot for you. So okay, so what then brought you to Barbados with this story? I'm so curious. It wasn't in the...
No, it was Jamaica in the original story. Well, I was doing some research into slavery in the Caribbean in general and just found some amazing resources that were very, very particular about how slavery manifested in Barbados specifically. And so because I had such lush and very concrete details of what that landscape was like and what those lives would have looked like, then that's where I ended up setting the tale.
That is really interesting. I also wanted to ask you about, so when George Washington Black is a child on this plantation in Barbados, which is called Faith, he has a guardian named Big Kit. And Big Kit comes from Dahomey in Africa. That's where she was taken from before being brought to Barbados. And she often talks about going home to Dahomey. And specifically, she has an idea that if she dies, she'll get to return there when she dies. So I being the kind of reader I am, which is a nerdy reader, I wanted to read everything I could about the history of Dahomey. And what I was wondering did that come out of your research about Barbados, or what made you make that decision? Was it a historical fact, or did you have a range of backgrounds that Kit might have come from? How did you make that selection?
Yeah, well, Dahomey, which is now current day Benin, obviously was just a huge hub for the slave trade. But one of the things about Dahomey that was so interesting is that it's this ancient kingdom. And in this kingdom, a lot of the king's guard were female. They were female warriors.
I was hoping that was it. I wasn't sure, but I was hoping that was... Okay, sorry.
Yeah, and so I thought, how fascinating if she feels herself to have been a descendant of these warriors, or to actually have been one of these warriors, and because she has this ferocity about her. So that's
she
very much where that came
This was
from.
the thing I encountered, that the Wikipedia article was entitled "The Dahomey Amazons," but yes. I encountered that after I'd read the book, and I was like, "This is so Big Kit." I could see her being a warrior. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. It's fascinating. So if I can get dark for a moment, that notion of death, and Big Kit fantasizes about committing suicide so that she can return to Dahomey, or even killing her ward Wash so that they can return together. Is that where did that come from?
That was very much part of the historical record. And there were so many slaves who had, in Barbados in particular, who had this belief that once you died, you would wake up whole and free in your own, in your home kingdom. And so that very much came to inform the front end of the book, and Washington's ideas of freedom, because that's the only way you're going to get free is to die. That's the only way you can return home.
Which is part of that relentless quest for home that Colm Tóibín talked about, but also, the brutality of his childhood, this that his guardian wishes to end his life and she thinks it's the best thing for him, I think is really a fascinating character background. You have this man of intelligence and gumption who still encounters the world. He's looking for paths. She's just recommendations on other things to do. And I found it so interesting that despite everything he has internally, as an integer, unique in his own, he's so influenced by the strong personalities who come into his life and that take him on these adventures around the world. And he's always looking for home. He is always searching for that. And to a degree, big kid. I thought that was fascinating. So you've touched on this a little bit already, but I am fascinated by historical research, and especially when you're going to, you're depicting characters who analogous, movers in real life may not have been able to leave a historical record. So I don't know how many, accounts from Barbados in this time someone like Wash would have existed. So what was your historical research process on this? It must have been so... I just picture piles of books.
Yes, that's that's exactly it. I had a journalist for the Globe and Mail in Canada come and interview me, and she said, can I see your source material? And my office was a disaster, because it's often a disaster. It's like a pigsty. I'm terrible about it. But so I said, I'll bring up some of my source material, and after about 3 piles of it, she said, okay, stop. I just read everything that I could. Just there are so many books about historical documents about slavery in Barbados in particular. Like there's actually quite a bit, and also online. Like there's just you can actually look at old documents that have been scanned.
Did you ever find a single old document that really rocked your world? Did you have that archival light bulb moment?
I must have. But I think just in general, I just to go through those old documents and see in this very beautiful hand these names, and then their worth and their age, their ostensible ages, and seeing that, it was just hard to take that.
That comes difficult. Through really beautifully in the text. There's a passage where I think you describe the records kept akin to goods like sugar, where that's
it's very much like that. It was, you get a sense of people being completely depersonalized and dehumanized. So that was some very difficult research.
But you bravely did it to bring us this wonderful text, so thank you. So the historical research is a huge part of it. Obviously, it has to be with the historical novel. But this book is also, I would say, as much about science. Mm-hmm. And that really pleased me, because I've been a book editor for a long time, and I find there aren't a lot of writers who can reach across the left brain, right brain aisle, and then so it's always a delight to me when I read a really beautiful literary novel that addresses science. I'm curious where the balance came for you and where you got this mesh of ideas, and to touch on some of the ideas. They include aerospace and also marine biology. Mm-hmm. So where did that all come from?
It's hard to actually pinpoint. I mean, the book was written in so many different drafts. I probably did close to 12 drafts of this book. It was between 10 and 12 drafts, and I was constantly shifting things and throwing out material. There was so much that got wasted, I guess, that I just couldn't return to, and that I will probably never return to. It's just got cut and tossed out. But I had to really feel my way through this story, which is why I was talking about that element of surprise. Is there were so many different directions that the material went in that just felt wrong. And especially some of the endings, I felt very, like they were very pat, and I felt kind of straight-jacketed into tying up all of the loose ends. And then I realized that this is not what his life is. It's full of the unexpected, it's full of wonder and richness, and he really has no foothold in the world. He's really searching for his place. And for him to just patly find his place at the end of the book, I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler, just seemed wrong. And so there's this sense of uncertainty, even in the ending, that I feel like will characterize his entire life. That he will just never have a sense of certainty, and that this grows very much out of a childhood of slavery, right? This is a very precarious situation in which you're completely deracinated, cut off from your any idea of parenthood, like having parents, and being a descendant from not knowing your blood, and being also cut off from your land, like not really having a sense of love for it because there's so much hardship. And so that was, I just felt like the ending had to be very much a playing out of that sense of looking for a home and searching for a home and not really finding it.
I have two things in what you just said I want to ask you about, but before I forget, I think that Wash's loyalty to the people who come into his life, kind of the people who happen to him, and the way that he clings to them and kind of respects their legacies was a fascinating piece of his psychology. And I really enjoyed following that. I personally feel that way. I have a lot of trouble letting go of any part of my past or any people I've met, and I really related to him that way. Of course, he came from a really different background, and I thought that was really richly done and fascinating to follow.
And he's a child too.
Yeah.
I mean, he's looking for that safe person or that safe place where he'll be able to relax enough to sort of have a feel his sense of agency or sense of self. But he realizes that he's really he's alone in the world and he's friendless. So. And he's very rarely been shown a kindness up until this point when he gets taken in by Titch. And so, I mean, of course you're going to cling to that. Somebody finally sees you. And so it's hard for him to let that go.
So the two things, the first I want to ask you, so you mentioned twice now being surprised by the plot. Are you usually, as a book editor, I find that I have two kinds of writers. There are the writers who identify as pantsers, meaning they write by the seat of their pants, and then there are plotters who put all of the bullet points in order and write them. Do you identify as a pantser?
I didn't realize there was a term, but
yes. Yes.
Very much a pantser.
Interesting. I also found that there's some light or not so lighthearted rivalry between pantsers and plotters, and each group thinks the other is creatively wrong. So I should probably tell you that I'm actually a plotter, but I hope we can still be friends.
I think I'm a plotter who turns into a pantser. Like I'll make a very detailed plot and then completely goes out the window. Yeah,
that's perfect.
So the divide is not so wide.
I'm glad to hear you say that. So my other question about what you just said had to do with parenthood, and that this was interesting to me. Wash is, as you say, denatured, deracinated by his state of birth that he grows up in. He doesn't have any parents. He has a guardian who is really violent toward him. I mean, we learn fairly early on in the book that Big Kit, who's his only person, has done him a really terrible violence on at least one occasion, and he's still very loyal to her. And he goes through his life, wishing he knew, thinking of her because they've been separated, but also wishing he knew who he was, right? At the same time, across all of the characters of this book, there are all kinds of parental issues, often involving larger-than-life father figures and or absent mothers. And I was wondering, I wanted to talk specifically about motherhood, and Yes. Where did the book's foundations of motherhood come in for you? I know you wrote this book after you were a mother yourself, and I wonder if that had changed at all from previous works that you had.
I actually began this book when my son was like 2 months old. Not even. He was, maybe he was like 6 weeks old.
I don't know how you did that. I don't understand.
It was very stupidly done. I shouldn't have tried to take that on, because I wrote, I struggled and struggled and struggled. And then by the end of, 8 months, I maybe had 10 pages, whereas if I had just sort of let myself be a mother and not try to tackle it, I mean, the writing came so much more swiftly when I felt well rested. But how surprising.
But we have this out of it, and maybe those 8 months of work are actually all the backbone here. So
it could be. And actually a lot of the writing that I did in those 10 pages did actually stay in the book, which is, so I guess it was worth it in that sense.
Should be celebrated, I think.
Yeah. But I was asked if my own, my own role as a mother had informed like the character of Big Kit, and if motherhood made it more difficult to write a novel in which, children were so imperiled. And I have to say that and somebody asked, were you thinking of your own children? And no, I definitely was not thinking of my own children and my relationship with them. I don't think I could have written the book if I had, sort of been mentally putting myself in that place. It would have been too painful. Just to contemplate it from a distance is a very painful thing in and of itself.
So what about fatherhood? Because we have, Tich is obsessed with his father, and there are other very important father figures who come throughout the book.
Yeah, I guess that's a question I don't get a lot of. But there's definitely a sense of the fathers in the novel as being like failed fathers, and Tich himself becomes a father figure to Wash, and he's a very failed father figure. So there is that kind of sense of disappointment, unfulfillment, the fact that a father is not ultimately, in the end, somebody who's going to give you your full sense of self. You're not going to come out of this relationship with a sense of deep security, that there's always a betrayal at the heart of fatherhood, I guess, which I'm sure my husband was very thrilled with this sort of thing. But in this novel, the fathers and the surrogate fathers are always, in the end, disappointing.
I've already made you get a little bit personal, but I want to get really personal now. And I mean personal for me, because I am a newish mom. I have a 7-month-old, and I want to drill down more on that. How do you re-engage in a creative life afterward? And I hate the glass ceiling conversation about, can women have it all? So I'm not asking you that. I'm just asking you, as like one mom who's really made it work, what's your advice?
I think probably the best advice would be to not wait for those, those moments when you're feeling deeply inspired to sit down and write, because those are few and far between, and you'll be at your desk very rarely if you do that. It's important to, I guess, seize every moment that you have to kind of even just jot down notes. If something occurs to you, to carry a notebook and just jot that down. So to take every single moment where there's a gap, if the baby's sleeping or whatever, to make notes. But I have to say that I couldn't have written what I did without having an extremely supportive husband, who he's also a writer and also has all of his own things going on, but he's very much 50% of the team. And I've been on the road a long time, actually, so he's more than 50% at this point. And I really feel like having a supportive partner has made the writing life possible.
Okay, I'm going to talk to my husband about that. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. I did read an article in The Guardian a couple months ago, and I wish I could have found it again so I could quote it specifically, but it theorized that actually after childbirth and the bond that a woman is forced to form with her newborn, the biological bond, although she may be sleep deprived and lose gray matter, she also has new neuron connectivity in her brain that may open new paths to creativity, and specifically inventiveness and thinking of putting things together that, you wouldn't have before that experience, born out of the kind of psychic connection to your baby. That's, but yeah, so this is the first book that you wrote after kids, right? Sorry, again, this is about me. I'm just like trying to take all your advice and inspiration.
Yeah, I guess this is the first book I've written after kids because Half-Blood Blues was done, I was very pregnant when I wrote that book, but she was born kind of after it was released.
So you've proved that both pregnancy and having kids are good for fiction. So I think all female creatives in the room should take heart from this. That's awesome.
Yeah. So maybe. I mean, I haven't really thought deeply about this, and I'd like to read that article. But I like that idea of there being a sort of new connectivity and a new way of making leaps and joining things together. That's I like that.
So,
do you find that as a new mother?
No. No.
Okay.
I'm like, oh, she started writing after 2 months. This woman is an inspiration. Oh my gosh. No. But I was going to ask if you have something new on the boil now, or if all this relentless touring has been holding you back there, or you have something we can all look forward to.
Yeah, like I said, I've been on the road almost nonstop since September, so it's been hard to actually sit down and write anything that isn't a speech or something like that. But I've been doing a lot of research because that's something you can do in airplanes very easily. You can read and make notes. So I'm hoping this fall to get back to my desk and start writing again.
Too early to tell us what you're researching?
Much too early.
Yeah. Besides, you could tell us, and if it's like Washington Black, then it would have nothing to do with what you end up writing.
It's true.
So, but thank you for letting me ask you all those questions. I did want to open it up to the floor if anyone else. Oh, I'm so sorry. You were going to do a reading.
Oh, that's totally fine. No.
I was looking forward to it, and then I got so excited, and I just launched into interviewing you. Yes. Oh.
Do we have time?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. I'll read very briefly. Actually, my friend who read the audiobook is sitting at the back there, and he did a brilliant job. Yeah, it's Dion Graham. So I'll read just briefly from this section where I'll set it up by saying that I guess a terrible event has occurred on the plantation, and Tich and Wash find that they have to flee. I'm officially old, so I've got to wear these. Okay. We fled, staggering under our sacks in the grey half-light. The moon had dimmed. Tich relit the lantern and dropped a cloth over it, and we walked by the weak orange light, stumbling over the path we had traversed so many times. In silence, we fumbled and scrambled our way slowly up towards Corvus Peak. I could see the mountain, black and alien against the grey sky. I feared we must be discovered. I feared the master must have some manner of guard or watch that would alert him to our passage. But Tich did not share my fear. He walked steadily, distracted, weighed down by the seriousness of what he was about to do. I could see nothing in the darkness. When we reached the peak, we slid our packs off, our legs trembling, our faces damp with sweat. A wind was blowing. The cloud cutter roared, creaked, leaning into its ropes. The wind was warm and unpleasant, with a scent of iron and rain in it. I watched Titch's dark figure move to adjust the canister of gas in the blackness, grunting and cursing softly. The canopy hung high above me, a scorch against the lighter sky. Titch called to me urgently, and I clambered into the wicker and wood gondola, its oars stretching like antennae into the sky, its 4 odd wings creaking like rudders in the wind. How terrifying it all looked in the dark. A great hot fear of death went through me. As Tich was double-checking the bolts and knots, he paused to give me a strange, quiet look. But I said nothing, and he said nothing, and in the silence he turned back to his preparations. "Well, Wash?" he said at last. "Well," I said, terrified. Then, without another word, he adjusted the canister. A higher column of fire surged upwards into the canopy, and the fabric began to shudder and shake. The shaking was terrible. My teeth rattled in my skull. I stared in fascinated terror at the broad black mouth sucking up fire. The air stank of char and smoke, of burning oil. Finally, Tich leaned over and severed each rope in its turn. All around me, I could hear the hissing of the grass as the wicker basket was dragged across it, a vicious, final sound. In the half-light, I could just make out the hollows of Tich's face, his eyes blacked out, only the white shards of his teeth distinct and visible. I felt a give in my belly. I clutched at the oars of the cloud cutter in dread. The air around us began to howl. The sky rushed towards us. We were rising. I can barely describe the sight of it. I saw the threatening sky below, a great red crack of light, like a monstrous eye just opening. The sky was still black where we were, but the wind was already hurling us seaward. I watched the half-cut cane fields in the faint light, the white scars of harvest glistening like the part in a woman's hair. What did I feel? What would anyone feel in such a place? My chest ached with anguish and wonder, an astonishment that went on, and I could not catch my breath. The cloud cutter spun, turned gradually faster, rising ever higher. I began to cry. Deep, silent, racking sobs. My face turned away from Tich, staring out onto the boundlessness of the world. The air grew colder, crept in webs across my skin. All was shadow, red light, storm fire, and frenzy. And up we went into the eye of it, untouched, miraculous. Thank you.
I'm glad you picked that. That's such a wonderful scene. Are there any questions from the audience?
First of all, I love the book and I've given it to 1 million people. So, so all the research that goes into your work, do you ever feel like you're betraying it when you get really creative, or because you've done the research, you feel really confident that you can sort of like go the other way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like there are certain things that I can be a little bit more playful with, but that there are other facts, such as the facts of I guess of how the day-to-day operations of a plantation and the conditions of life there and the punishments that were meted out on the slaves on those plantations, those aren't anything to change. You have to honor that historical record. It would sort of be outlandish to try and manipulate that. But even things like the details of like the hot air balloon, like those are all very specific to the era. It's more, I guess the playfulness more comes out of interactions between characters. And in taking a contraption like a hot air balloon, which was very specifically built to mirror those of that era, or described as those that were operational during that era, but then allowing it to be used for means that it was never used for. So to to escape from a plantation, I thought that was all right. That I could do that, and that was something, where that grew very directly out of things that already existed. Yeah. Yes.
There were so many remarkable things about this book, but one, of course, that is very striking is here's a young man who finds a kind of freedom in his knowledge and learning about marine science, which then leads him to end up taking marine life and containing it, and not quite enslaving it, but taking away its freedom. That was a very powerful image. But in the middle of that, you also have that small but really brilliant scene with the octopus. And I'd like very much to just hear you talk about the octopus. I mean, I think we all had our own reaction. That somehow was a really personal moment in the book.
Yeah, so there's a point in the book in which Wash is asked to do a shallow sea dive to gather specimens for this exhibition that they're holding in England, in which they're going to get the specimens and then they're going to kill them and embalm them, and everybody can come and sort of have a glance. And Washington does this dive, and he ends up seeing this very rare octopus. And in fact, the octopus is on the Canadian cover because it's such a central moment. That's what they chose. But he looks at it and he feels immediately this affinity for this animal that is, it's really very symbolic of transformation, right? An octopus is constantly shifting. It's able to fit into any setting. Just simply by changing its form. And that's something that he's also been trying on. He's trying to change himself. He's trying to find a place where he will be comfortable and fit and camouflaged. But this is something that is impossible for a man like him. And so when he sees it, he just feels like, in a sense, this is me. And this is what I'm striving for. And what a horrible thing this would be to kill this creature. And so he comes up with this idea of transporting it live.
And just to follow up on that question, because I love sort of his whole the way he's educated in the era is so typical, and it's appropriate to do all this sort of marine science. But did that come to you first, and then you decided for the octopus, or did you kind of have the octopus as a symbol and an image, and then say, oh, marine science is the way to go?
No, it grew very much out of the marine science angle. The octopus came very late into the book. It was more about him having this talent, and it was a talent for drawing marine life, and then it sort of moved into a talent for categorization and all of this. And so, it just seemed very natural for him to find something that was going to be a specimen that he just felt very strongly about. And I had an early reader who was my agent who said, okay, by the end of the novel, we need to find out what happens to this octopus. Please don't kill this creature. But we don't find out. I'll run that spoiler for you.
I do want to express my gratitude for your having taken the position on octopodes versus octopi, which I think is a plural mistake that is often, we're just rife with that octopi problem. So thank you. Any other questions?
One of the global themes that I got out of the book was that it's how much better the world could be if people weren't so horribly oppressed, and what kind of abilities and talents for people who never get an opportunity for an education, or
Yeah.
or held down by history like slavery. Also, you see the potential in Wash, how gifted in the arts and sciences, and how natural is with the naturalist. This is really appalling. You think how much better the world would be. Like, for example, besides slavery, I always think of the Holocaust as well. The
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, definitely. That's something I was very much wanting to make a point of. Just how much we're informed by the circumstances of our births, and whether that's the era in which we're born into, or the neighborhood. Like, think about how many people are limited just by having been born into a certain neighborhood, and how difficult that is to escape the confines of that. And it's really troubling. I mean, this is something that we really have to work on. Income inequality, racial inequality. These things are just at the heart of.
I love the almost whimsical way you have that notion in the book when Titch is telling Wash a story about how he almost died in an avalanche when he was mountain climbing in the snow. And Wash says, "What's snow?" Because he's a Bayesian boy who has never left the Caribbean. And I think Titch says something along the lines of, "It will never matter to you," or something like that. Like, you'll never know, it won't matter. And then obviously it does actually a lot, but just that notion of what a personal neighborhood is, and how much further we can go beyond our circumstances with opportunity is really.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question, anyone? Okay. Oh, I like that question. What was my favorite scene to write? God, I had a lot of fun with certain parts of this novel. It's hard to sort of quantify, but I think maybe that scene with the octopus, where he sees the octopus and he's he's wearing this, he's got on this this metal and canvas diving suit, because you see these in old photographs. It's like, you think, how could anybody have gone into the water in such a contraption? And so that was a lot of fun to research, to make sure I had the one that was like specific to that era. But just this kind of, it's a moment in which he feels a great peace. Like, he comes to this, he's thinking about all the terrible things, but he feels totally unburdened in that moment. And I think that's a very rare thing for him in this book, because he's so often burdened. So for him to have a moment of peace, and to be surrounded by all of this amazing aquatic life, and to just have this sense of calm, that was my favorite scene to write.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for coming and giving me an excuse to be here. But I know that Esi is going to be signing in the back over there, and I hope. Sorry. Oh, up there. Don't listen to me, but I do hope I can, rush up to the front and get to the front of the line, because I really want to get my book signed. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Juliet. Thank you.